Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon session, Flexible Evacuation Solutions, meeting BS 8629. My name's Ken Bullock, and I'm the Business Development Manager at Advanced Electronics. What we're going to cover today is a brief introduction into Advanced, a little bit of an overview on 8629, some of the features, and then a quick summary at the end to round it all up. So, for those of you that aren't familiar with Advanced Electronics, we are a UK leading manufacturer of life safety technology based up in Newcastle upon Tyne, where we now service a head office and manufacturing facility over 80 countries around the world. We're now part of the Helmer PLC group, which is a FTSE 100 listed company. A little fun fact for you. On average, there are between 20 and 30 fires a day that occur in tower blocks. And it is very uncommon for us to require a full evacuation of the block because of this incident. Obviously, the headline is the Grenfell Tower tragedy. And then out of that Grenfell Tower tragedy came the Dame Judith Hackett report, which is where we're going to lead on to within the creation of BS 8629, which is the code of practice for the installation, commissioning and maintenance of evacuation and alert systems. Now, as we sit here today, this is only a recommendation. There's no requirement within law, the building regulations, to have so here in England. Scotland has already taken a slightly different approach and has put it in its technical handbook for all new builds over 18 metres. And of course, this only really applies to residences, blocks of flats that have a stay put policy, where there's no need for in a normal application to have a communal fire alarm. So there's lots of other things going on at the moment about stay put policy and the building regulations and the buildings being fit for purpose. But this code of practice very much focuses on a stay put policy is in place and robust. It goes on to say that we have a control and indicating equipment for the operation of the fire service, but it's not a fire detection and alarm system. So it doesn't have automatic detectors. It doesn't have call points. It just has sounders. It goes on to say, in fact, we actually don't have any outputs for smoke vent control, gas control, lift controls. All of those need to be on separate controlling systems, not our BS 8629 evacuation and alert system. The fire and rescue service can use it for evacuating the block for other reasons, not just fire. There could be a major gas leak, etc., etc. But it's for their use and their control only. It's fair to say, if we're going to do one of these systems, we need to build it in right from the early planning stage, because it needs to work with the fire strategy for that building. So it's right at the early stage, we need to bring that planning into place. Then those design decisions need to be recorded as part of this golden thread that we're now talking about for all new build constructions. So we've got the reasons for it right from the start. As I've said, and I repeat myself, there's no requirement in law today to have one of these systems. So therefore, we need to consult with the fire and rescue service to see what the application is and whether it's relevant for them going forward. And that can be building control, fire and rescue service, insurers, the whole gambit. Once we look at these systems, we have to design them differently. Again, go through my process again. It's not a fire detection and alarm system. So therefore, we need to design them differently. They're to be used in a different stage of a fire. So therefore, we're not going to use them in the early stages. The fire will be well developed, and these almost become a system of last resort, because the fire and rescue service will determine that they need to now evacuate typically a floor of residents at a time, or maybe 2 or 3 floors, in order not to flood the staircase. It does allow for connection to hard of hearing equipment. So we can have paging systems for the hard of hearing. We can have social alarms for the hard of hearing. But all of those systems can be incorporated into an evacuation system to enable the residents to make an informed decision as to when to leave the building. Unlike we're getting used to now within the fire detection and alarm industry, there is no CPR, Construction Product Directive requirements for a evacuation alert system. They're new. Therefore, we don't have a third-party certificate to say they meet the requirements. We should look to use the elements of an EM54 Part 2 approved fire panel to meet these requirements. The field devices, however, are very different, because those field devices, we can use this third-party approved equipment to ensure we get the right level of devices. Once we then come to look to cable the system, there's a few things we need to take into consideration. So we'll wire a loop or a circuit to the floor and then tee off into each of the flats. And we've got some very particular requirements. So a building of 10 stories or fewer with 2 simultaneous faults on a circuit should not disable more than half the number of circuits containing flats. Where we have a system of 10 stories or more, we then should have our 2 simultaneous faults not disabling more than a third of the number of stories containing flats. Now, when we look at the design of these systems in more detail, there's a lot of other things we need to take into account, especially to do with loop loadings, etc. So you can't just take that headline and run with it. We need to use the headline and then build the system requirements around it. I've mentioned there, the evacuation and alert zone. This is a new concept which has come up from these type of systems. And what it's done, it typically works with that firefighting plan to say, how would the fire and rescue service look to evacuate the building in the event of an uncontrolled incident? So typically it's one a floor. Regardless of size, regardless of square meterage, unlike other codes of practice we have in the UK, the evacuation alert zone is there to say, no, we want that particular floor or that area of the floor residents to evacuate. When we look at those, we then typically have a sounder within each dwelling. Now, the sounder may require more than one, but we need it clearly distinguishable from any other signal. So you may have lift alarms, you may have carbon monoxide alarms, you may have an intruder alarm in the flat. This signal must be completely distinguishable from those. Once we have our distinguishable signal, our tone, we then must achieve 2 sound pressure level readings. The first one is 85 dB at the bedroom door with the door open. So on a 1-bedroom flat, the one sounder may suffice. But if we have a 2 or 3-bedroom department over multiple levels, extra devices may be required. We then have the principal inhabitable room. This is the one that is room that is used for regular daytime use. Here, we need to achieve 60 dB. The other rooms, the bathroom, the kitchen, we do not need to class within what we're trying to achieve. As I've already mentioned, arrangements for the disabled are really the hard of hearing as far as this standard is concerned. There is already work going on, some of you may be aware of the term, for PEEPs, personal evacuation plans. They're outside the scope of this standard, as indeed are premises information boxes, which will again hold this relevant information for the fire and rescue service when they arrive on site. You won't know which residents will require this extra ability during the design stage of your system, especially if you're designing a new build. So we have to allow additional loop capacity for them to be added afterwards. So we need to take the relevant requirements now to say, rather than a loop loading of maybe 80 or 90%, wind that back to maybe 70%. So you can add these facilities on as residents start to get in. And bear in mind, a resident's need may change. They may move into a flat today and be perfectly able to hear what's going on, but actually require these to be added down the line. And that's where that personal evacuation plan comes in. The control and indicating equipment has to be simple to use. This is to be used by the operational fire and rescue crews in the event of an incident. So they want simple, at a glance operation, very much focused on toggle switches, LEDs, and nothing else. No key switches, no passwords. These must be easy for them to use without training. And also, regardless of manufacturer, because again, what they don't want to do is have to have, oh, this is product A, it works like this. This is product B, it works like that. Too complicated. These are fast developing situations where these will be used. So therefore, we need to make sure it's simple to use. And that is, again, another reason why it's not suitable to have those automatic fire detection devices, or indeed those outputs for lifts, alarms, etc., connected to it. It's fair to say that because of that simple operation, a remote connectivity to a third-party monitoring center for fault monitoring would be very advisable, purely because without that, there is no way for anyone to know when a fault develops on this system, apart from the maintenance, which we'll come on to in a little bit. Because of that simple operation, the panel is enclosed in a security enclosure. This is a steel box designed to be vandal resistant and difficult to access through a key which is patent protected for unauthorized access. This needs to meet a security standard, STS 205, LPS 1175, to ensure it can withstand those attacks. We then have a lock which cannot be copied, and the cylinder to the lock must again meet BS 13303, the high security cylinder lock standard. The box itself then has to have the ability to withstand this attack that I keep talking about. And it can be done with any number of products that would be seen to be normally available lying around a flat or apartment. So we've got cordless drills, hacksaws, hammers, bolt cutter, these type of things. I always like fishing line and hooks. I think it's brilliant. But the idea is we can't bash the corner of the box, drop something down having deformed it, to pull up a lever which allows the box to open. Because once that box is open, as we said before, the toggle switch would start evacuating the floor. And the last thing you'd want is residents getting immune to the noise of these systems because they would continually being vandalized. As we've said, the control panel itself has to have a slide-in label to ensure ease of operation. Sorry, it doesn't have to have a slide-in label, it has to have a clear label. We happen to use slide-in labels to identify which area or which areas of the building are evacuated by each of the switches. There's an emergency light, which would have to be within 2 meters of the box to ensure it can be read easily by the fire and rescue service. And this layout that you see in front of you is pretty much universal across all manufacturers, because the code of practice 8629 very much dictates exactly how this layout should be. Toggle switch, red LED, yellow LED. And that's again for the fire and rescue service to ensure they get that consistent of operation regardless of the crew that turns up at the event. It's fair to say that we can achieve these systems in a number of different ways. A typical way would be to use a wired system, where we would wire to each of the sounders in turn. We could use radio to do our BS8629 system. Far less disruptive in the flat, because we haven't got to wire into each one. We just got to put 2 screws in and away we go. If we're using radio, we must be mindful that we need to use radio that meets BSEN 54 Part 25. There's quite a few different styles of radio available within the fire and detection and alarm industry. So you just need to make sure you're using product that meets that requirement. And indeed, one of the other solutions which we're finding lots of people are using are the hybrid solutions, where you've got a part wired, part wireless version. There are flats you can get into, therefore we'll use the wired sounder, but maybe that second sounder becomes a wired or a wireless sounder. I mentioned earlier about maintenance, because again, they've looked very closely within the code of practice to say, how can we maintain these systems? We cannot expect to gain access to each flat every year to carry out a routine maintenance. So what they've said is very simple. What you can do is they call it a 2-man test. Someone stands outside the flat. Someone else turns the sounder in the flat on individually. So we can then go into an engineering level, turn each sounder on individually, and we can hear it from outside the door. Yep, that one works, and move on. And over the 12-month period, we have to have tested each of those sounders in that methodology, as well as doing a switch test to make sure the switches work each time we're doing it. It's fair to say some of the more sophisticated systems have the ability for self-listening sounders, self-testing sounders, and they can be very useful as well to ensure that we get that approach. Finally, from me, really a look at third-party accreditation, purely because third-party accreditation is something that, as an industry, we're driving towards. BAFE operate most of the third-party schemes for the fire detection and alarm industry. They recognise that evacuation alert systems are not the same, and therefore they have produced SP207 for that particular application. So we have BAFE SP207 as a third-party accredited scheme for all elements of an evacuation alert system. And if you're looking to get someone to install, maintain, or specify one of these systems, look for their accreditation to ensure you're getting someone that's competent to do the job you're paying them to do. And that really applies across all the fire sectors, whether it's the fire alarm, the risk assessment. Look to use those third-party approved people. Because there's not many people on the 207 register at the moment, look for SP203 and whether they're going to actually move and encourage them to move into SP207. Finally, a little bit there. Obviously, we've done number of these systems now. A testimonial there from a happy installer. They use advanced fire detection equipment a lot. Therefore, it was a natural choice for them to use when it came to evacuation alert systems. Purely gave them spares, didn't need re-engineer training. It was able to go in without a hitch, so to speak. So, quick summary. Evacuation alert systems. BS8629, they're not fire systems. They are standalone use for the fire and rescue service. They're for new builds with stay put policy, although we're now starting to see them come in for the retrofit market as well. There's no legal requirement to have one, so therefore it has to be done at design stage. Fire risk assessors can determine whether they're needed, but always consult with the fire and rescue service as part of that design. Features, we need to make sure it's integrity sound, we have the correct number of evacuation alert zones, and we have the right audibility level within each of the apartments. Control and indicating equipment, discuss sighting with the fire and rescue service. It's very important that these are sited in the right place as well. You don't want to use one of these blocking that main artery or staircase that is the main escape. You need to have a robust enclosure meeting that STS 205 LPS 1175 requirement. And we can use wired, wireless or hybrid solutions to meet this application. Maintenance, we need to make sure we've got a good maintainer that keeps the system up to date and is maintained in accordance with the code of practice. You can always find out more about any of our solutions, but our BS8629 solutions especially, by going and finding us on any of the usual social media channels. I would recommend the YouTube channel. There's lots of helpful tips and videos on there now, or indeed our own website. For those of you that are interested more in finding out about BS8629, by going to the website, you can book on our 1-hour CPD course, where we go into the standard in a lot more detail than we've had time to do today. Finally, from me, thank you very much for your time. Hope you have a very pleasant afternoon. And we look forward to questions coming through in the near future.